The snow fell like ash over Seoul that night, slow, indifferent, and cold. Outside the Yanoa Funeral Hall, black cars lined the curb in perfect silence, their engines off, their drivers standing still as statues in the frozen air. Inside, golden light bled softly through frosted glass panels, and Korea's most powerful executives stood in careful clusters, whispering in voices low enough not to disturb the dead. The casket at the front of the room was polished, dark mahogany. The flowers arranged around it were white. Everything was white. Everything was cold. And at the very front row, seated alone with his spine perfectly straight and his hands clasped over his knees, sat Lee Min-jun, 34 years old, worth more than most small nations and completely, terrifyingly unmoved. Not one tear. Not one tremor of grief. Just those sharp eyes fixed forward, jaw tight, the silver watch on his wrist catching the light every few seconds like a quiet pulse. His father's watch. The only inheritance Lee Seo-jun had given his son while still alive. When the lawyer stepped forward and cleared his throat, the room shifted. Every executive turned. Every whisper stopped. And Lee Min-jun finally blinked. The will reading was brief. The legal language was dense. The assets were enormous. But none of that is what made the room go quiet. What made the room go quiet was a single paragraph, read in a calm, measured voice, that changed everything. Lee Min-jun shall not assume full executive control of Lee Seo-jun Holdings, nor receive access to the primary inheritance trust until he has fulfilled the following condition, in full, without compromise, for a period of no less than 1 calendar year. He must reside in the family estate with a foreign domestic worker selected through the Lee Seo-jun Humanity Foundation and treat that individual with the full dignity and respect afforded any human being. Only upon satisfactory completion of this condition, as monitored by the Foundation's board, shall the inheritance be transferred in its entirety. The lawyer looked up. The room held its breath. And then Lee Min-jun stood up, so fast his chair scraped back across marble. "What?" he said, not a question, a threat. "This is a story about a man who had everything and understood nothing. A woman who had almost nothing and understood everything. And the 1 year that destroyed the distance between them completely. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin." The argument lasted 40 minutes. Min-jun stood in the corridor outside the funeral hall with his coat still on, his silver watch glinting under the fluorescent overhead light, his voice dropping lower and lower the angrier he got, which was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. "Who authorized this clause?" he said. The lawyer, a small, careful man named Attorney Park, held his briefcase with both hands. "Your father drafted it himself, sir. 8 months ago. It was notarized and witnessed by 3 independent parties." "My father," Min-jun said slowly, was apparently losing his mind in his final year. Attorney Park said nothing. "I run a company with 47,000 employees. I have a board meeting in 4 days. I have a quarterly earnings review, an acquisition negotiation, and a partnership summit with 3 international firms in the next 2 months." He paused. "And my father's dying wish was for me to babysit a maid. A domestic worker." Attorney Park corrected gently, then immediately regretted it. Min-jun looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a problem that needs to be removed. "Can it be contested?" he asked. "We have already reviewed that possibility thoroughly. The clause is airtight." Your father anticipated a legal challenge. Attorney Park opened his briefcase and removed a single sealed envelope. "He also left this, for you personally, to be opened in private." Min-jun took the envelope. He did not open it. He walked back into the funeral hall, stood in front of his father's casket for exactly 30 seconds, then turned and walked out into the snow. His driver was waiting. The car door opened without a word. Inside the vehicle, alone in the dark leather interior, Min-jun pressed the envelope between his palms. He stared at it for a long time. Then he set it on the seat beside him without opening it and looked out at the snow-covered city sliding past. Kang Hyun-soo, his executive director, was waiting at the mansion when he arrived. 40 years old, perpetually anxious, unfailingly loyal, Hyun-soo had been Min-jun's right hand for 6 years and had learned, over that time, exactly when to speak and exactly when to be silent. Tonight was a silence night. He could see it in the way Minjun walked through the front doors without acknowledging him, the silver watch catching the light from the entrance chandelier as he shrugged off his coat. The foundation contacted the estate this afternoon, Hyunsu said carefully, following 3 steps behind. They said the selected candidate has already arrived in Seoul. She flew in from Lagos 2 days ago. Minjun stopped walking. She's already here? She's at a hotel near Hanamdong. The foundation arranged temporary accommodations. They're requesting permission to bring her to the estate tomorrow morning. No. Hyunsu waited. Tonight, Minjun said. If I'm doing this, I'm not spending one unnecessary night pretending otherwise. Bring her tonight. Hyunsu nodded slowly. Sir. It's past 10 o'clock. The woman just traveled from. Tonight, Hyunsu. The door to Minjun's private study closed, and Hyunsu stood alone in the hallway, pulling out his phone with a quiet, pained exhale. The hotel room was clean but small. Precious Okafor sat on the edge of the single bed, fully dressed, too alert to sleep even though her body was exhausted from the 14-hour flight and the 2 days of waiting that had followed it. Her single suitcase stood by the door. Her small gold necklace, her mother's necklace, sat warm against her collarbone. She was 25 years old. She had a degree in hospitality management from the University of Lagos. She spoke English, Igbo, and conversational French. She had worked in hotels, in private homes, in executive residences. She was good at her job. She was professional. She was disciplined. She was also, at this exact moment, sitting alone in a foreign country at 10:30 at night, watching snow fall past a window she'd never opened, in a city where she didn't know a single soul. When her phone buzzed with a call from the foundation coordinator, she answered on the second ring. Miss Okafor, I'm so sorry for the late notice, the coordinator said, voice rushed. The estate has requested that you be brought to the residence tonight. I know it's late, but I understand, Precious said. Her voice was calm. It was always calm. That was the first thing people noticed, the stillness in her voice, the way she spoke like someone who had learned very early that panic cost more than it solved. A car will arrive in 20 minutes. I'll be ready, she said. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She checked her necklace in the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of ritual. Her mother had pressed it into her palm the morning she'd left Lagos. You carry us with you, her mother had said. Don't you ever forget that. She picked up her suitcase. She walked to the door. She was ready. The Lee estate in Hanamdong was not what anyone would call welcoming. It was magnificent, that was beyond question. A stone compound set behind iron gates and manicured hedges, the main house rising 4 stories above a courtyard dusted with snow, its interior lights glowing through enormous floor-to-ceiling windows. It looked like something from a magazine, something that existed to be admired from a distance and never touched. The car pulled through the gates and stopped in the courtyard. Precious stepped out into the cold. She had worn her best dress, a deep navy wrap dress, neat and professional. Her hair was braided back in tight, elegant rows. She held her suitcase handle with both hands and looked up at the house for one quiet moment before the front door opened. Madame Han came out first, a small woman in her 60s with a round, warm face and sharp eyes behind thick glasses. She came down the entrance steps with a pace that said she had been walking these stairs for decades and wasn't intimidated by them. Miss Okafor, she said, and her voice was genuinely warm. I'm Madame Han. I manage the household. Welcome. Thank you, Precious said. I'm sorry it's so late. Don't be sorry. That's not your fault. Madame Han gave her a careful, approving look, taking in the calmness, the dignity, the tired but composed young woman in front of her. Something softened in the old woman's face. Come inside. You must be cold. They were almost at the door when it opened wider. And Lee Min-jun stepped out. He was still in his funeral clothes, the black tailored suit, the silver watch on his left wrist, the dark coat hanging open at the front. His hair was slightly disordered, as if he had run his hand through it once in the last hour and hadn't corrected it. He was taller than she had expected, and his eyes, when they landed on her, were exactly as she had been warned they would be.
Cold.
Then something moved through them, surprise, maybe. Or something she couldn't name yet. And then the coldness returned, harder. He looked at her the way a person looks at an inconvenience they haven't yet found a way to remove. "You're the one from Nigeria," he said. Not a question. Not a greeting. "Yes," Precious said. "My name is Precious Okafor. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Lee." She did not look away from him. That seemed to bother him slightly, though his expression barely moved. He was used to people softening under his gaze, adjusting, looking down or sideways or anywhere that wasn't directly back at him. She didn't do any of those things. She looked at him with those quiet, intelligent eyes, and she waited. "This is not a pleasant arrangement for me," he said. Blunt. Brutal. Deliberately so. "I understand that," she said. "I want that clear from the beginning. You're here because I have no legal choice. Not because I want you here. Not because I believe you belong here." Madame Han made a small, pained sound beside her. Precious took a slow breath. "I understand that too," she said. "And I want to be equally clear about something. I'm here to do my job. I'll do it professionally. I'll do it well. And I'll do it with or without your approval." The silence that followed was short and electric. Minjun's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. "Madame Han," he said, without breaking eye contact with Precious. "Show her to the staff quarters." He turned and walked back inside. Madame Han waited until the door closed behind him, then turned to Precious with an expression that was equal parts apology and admiration. "He's not always,"
she started.
"It's all right," Precious said quietly. "It's not," Madame Han said firmly. "But we'll work with what we have." She led Precious inside. The staff quarters were at the east wing of the second floor, not a servant's closet, not a storage room repurposed, but an actual bedroom with a proper bed, a window, a small bathroom, and more floor space than Precious had lived in for the last 2 years. She set her suitcase down and stood still for a moment, processing. She was here for a year. 365 days in this cold, magnificent house, serving a man who had already made clear that he resented her existence. She pressed her hand to her mother's necklace. Then she unpacked her suitcase with careful, deliberate movements, hung her dresses in the wardrobe, arranged her toiletries in the bathroom, and placed on the bedside table the one framed photograph she carried everywhere, her family in Lagos, her mother laughing, her 2 younger siblings grinning with gap-toothed smiles, all of them squinting in the bright afternoon sun. She looked at that photo for a long moment.
"Don't you ever forget that."
"I haven't," she said quietly. To the photograph. To the room. To herself. Then she turned off the light and went to sleep. The first week was a war of silent rules. Minjun established them without stating them, the way a person who has always had power establishes things, through behavior and expectation rather than words. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not enter certain rooms. Do not eat until he has eaten. Do not exist in his space without purpose. Precious learned the rules quickly. She was good at reading environments. She had worked in enough difficult households, difficult hotels, difficult executives, to understand that the architecture of a powerful person's home was also the architecture of their personality. Every rule told you something about the person who made it. Lee Min-jun's rules told her he was deeply, profoundly, pathologically alone. The house was enormous and it was empty. 8 bedrooms, 3 sitting rooms, a private library, a home gym, a chef's kitchen, and no family photographs anywhere. No personal decoration. No evidence of warmth or history except the small details Madame Han had clearly added herself. A vase of flowers in the entrance hall, a woven throw blanket on the living room sofa, a ceramic bowl of river stones on the kitchen counter that no one ever touched. Precious cleaned every room with the same quiet attention. She learned the house the way she had learned every house, by touching it, by understanding how it breathed. Minjun barely acknowledged her existence. He left before 7 most mornings in a black car, the silver watch perfect on his wrist, his coat buttoned against the winter air, his eyes already focused on something far ahead. He returned after 9 most evenings, sometimes later. He ate alone. He worked late. He moved through his own home like a visitor who wasn't sure he was allowed to stay. On the fifth day, Precious changed something small. She put a cup of hot citrus tea on the desk in his study, the one room she had been given no instruction about, but had decided to clean anyway. She left it without a note, without waiting. She just left it and went back to her other work. That evening, she noticed the cup had been moved. Not to the kitchen, just to the other side of the desk. Like someone had picked it up, held it, then set it back down somewhere more comfortable. She did it again the next morning. And the morning after that. On the third morning, she was passing the study door when it opened, and Minjun stood in the doorway with the tea in his hand, still steam rising, looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked. "It's citrus and ginger," she said. "For cold mornings. And stress." A pause. "I didn't ask what it is. You worked past midnight again. Your light was on when I went to get water at 2 a.m. She held his gaze. "You've been under enormous pressure this week. Anyone would be." Something flickered in his face. Not softness, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like surprise at being seen. "I don't need your observations about my life," he said. "Understood," she said. "I'll keep making the tea anyway." She walked away before he could respond. Behind her, she heard nothing. Not the sound of the cup being set down in displeasure. Not the door closing in dismissal. Just silence. And somehow, that was enough. The call from his board came at the end of the second week, and Minjun took it in the car on the way back from a late investor dinner, his silver watch cold against his wrist in the winter air seeping through the car window he'd cracked open because he needed to breathe. The message was clear. The board was watching the inheritance situation. Several senior executives were already positioning for power in his absence, or what they hoped would become his absence. The company was his father's legacy. Without formal control, Minjun was strong but exposed. He needed this year to go smoothly. He needed her to stay. That thought arrived in his head with a kind of irritation he didn't fully understand yet. He needed the Nigerian woman, Precious, the name registered with unexpected clarity, to stay in his house for a year, because his father, in whatever final wisdom or madness had taken him, had decided that Lee Minjun of all people needed to learn humanity. He arrived home at 10:40. The house was quiet. The entrance hall light was on. The kitchen light was on. He walked toward it, intending to pass through to his study. She was at the kitchen counter, not cleaning, which was her right at this hour, but writing. A letter, handwritten, in English on pale yellow paper. She wrote with her whole body slightly bent over the page, her braids falling forward, her gold necklace catching the light. Her left hand was spread flat on the counter beside the paper, like she needed to feel something solid while the words came out. She didn't hear him. He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds longer than he meant to. Then he walked in, and she looked up, no alarm, no guilt, just that calm, level gaze. "I'm almost finished," she said, assuming he needed the kitchen. "I don't need anything," he said. Then, before he could stop himself, "Who are you writing to?" She looked at him for a moment, as if weighing the question. "My mother," she said. "You email?" "Not always. She likes letters. She says she can feel the ink." A small pause. "She's not in good health. I write to her every 2 weeks." He said nothing. "I came here partly to help with her medical expenses," Precious said. She wasn't asking for sympathy. Her voice was simply even, explaining a fact. "The salary the foundation offered is significant. In Naira, it's life-changing." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the night she arrived. The gold necklace. The careful handwriting. The photograph on the bedside table he had noticed through her open door that morning, though he would never admit he'd noticed it. "Finish your letter," he said. And he walked out. 3 weeks in, Seo Yura arrived. She came on a Saturday morning in a white car that looked like it had been polished specifically for arrival, and she walked through the front doors of the Lee estate the way she always walked through spaces, like she was already the owner of them. She was 31, spectacularly beautiful in the way that wealth and maintenance produced, and she had been informally positioned as Minjun's future wife by 2 sets of corporate parents for the last 2 years. Minjun had never agreed to this. He had also never disagreed. He simply hadn't engaged with it, which Yura had interpreted, not entirely incorrectly, as eventual acceptance. She swept into the front sitting room in a camel coat and diamond earrings, kissed Minjun on the cheek without invitation, and then turned and saw Precious. Precious was carrying a stack of freshly laundered linens from the hall closet, moving with her usual quiet efficiency. She stopped when she saw the guest. She inclined her head politely. "Good morning." Yura looked at her, then at Minjun, then back at her. "This is the—" She paused in a way that was precisely calculated. "The domestic worker? The one from the will?" "Precious Okafor," Minjun said. His voice was flat. "She manages the household." Yura tilted her head. The diamond earrings caught the light. "How unusual she is." Precious continued to stand still with the linens in her arms, her expression perfectly composed. "I'll put these away," Precious said to the room at large, and walked smoothly out of the sitting room and up the stairs. Yura turned to Minjun the moment she was gone. "You could have warned me." "Warned you about what?" "That she was so—" Yura gestured vaguely. "Present." Minjun looked at her with his signature expression, the unreadable one that could mean anything, and therefore made people constantly anxious. "She lives here. Presence is expected." "You know what I mean, Minjun." "I don't," he said. "Would you like tea?" Upstairs, Precious pressed the stack of linens to her chest and stood in the hallway for a moment. Her jaw was set. Not with hurt. She had experienced far sharper words than unusual in her life. But with the specific, exhausting weight of being assessed and found insufficient by someone who had done nothing to earn the right to assess her. She breathed. She put the linens away. She went back to her work. That afternoon, she overheard Yura in the garden below her window saying, in Korean, she thought Precious couldn't understand. "How long does she have to be here?" "It's embarrassing." Precious's Korean was limited, but she caught enough. She closed the window quietly. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, pressed her hand over her mother's necklace, and allowed herself, for exactly 60 seconds, to feel everything she had been carrying since she stepped off the plane in Seoul. The exhaustion, the strangeness, the loneliness, the weight of being seen as less, always less, by people who had never asked her a single question. 60 seconds. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, went downstairs and began preparing dinner for 3 because Yura was apparently staying, and Precious Okafor was not going to give anyone a single reason to call her work inadequate. The dinner she made was remarkable. She couldn't help that. Minjun noticed. He sat across the table from Yura that evening and watched her eat with the performance energy she always brought to social situations. The laughter timed too perfectly, the comments designed to remind him of her connections, her family, her value as a partner. And the food arrived in courses he hadn't asked for, plated simply, but with an intuitive elegance that stopped him mid-sentence the first time a dish appeared. Yura said, "Your caterer improved." "Precious made this," Madame Han said, appearing from the kitchen door with pleasant, pointed innocence. Yura looked down at her plate, said nothing else. After dinner, when Yura had gone to the guest room and the house was quiet again, Minjun found himself in the kitchen doorway a second time in 3 weeks. Precious was at the sink, washing up. The radio was on very low, something he didn't recognize, a female voice singing in a language he didn't know. He watched her for a moment. The necklace at her collarbone, the braids, the quiet, deliberate movements. The food was excellent, he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "Thank you. You didn't have to do 3 courses." "I know." She turned back to the sink. "I wanted to." He leaned against the doorframe, his arms folded, the silver watch cold against the inside of his wrist. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. He almost thought she wasn't going to answer. "Because the house felt heavy today," she said finally. "Cooking helps. It's something my mother taught me. When things are heavy, you make something good. You put care into something." She paused. "And the kitchen was the only room today where someone wasn't reminding me I don't belong here." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before it. He felt something he hadn't expected to feel, shame. Not performed, boardroom-controlled discomfort, actual shame. the kind that moved through you before you could stop it. He stood in the doorway for another moment. Then, Seo Yura leaves tomorrow morning. Precious said nothing. This is your home for the year, he said. His voice was strange, lower, less sharp. Conduct yourself accordingly. He pushed off the doorframe and walked away. Precious stood at the sink with her hands still in the warm water, the radio still playing softly, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She didn't know what that moment was. She wasn't sure he did either. But something had just changed in this house. Something small and irreversible. The incident happened on a Tuesday night at the end of the 4th week. Minjun had been working impossible hours. The acquisition negotiation had developed a complication. 2 of his senior directors were locked in a dispute that required his direct intervention, and his body was beginning to register all of it in ways it never had before. He was 34, not 50. But grief, it turned out, had a weight that exhausted even the strongest frame.
He just hadn't admitted that yet.
He came home at midnight, bypassed his bedroom, and went straight to his study. At some point, he couldn't track exactly when, he fell asleep at his desk. At 2 a.m., Precious went to get water from the kitchen and saw the study light still on. She hesitated at the door. She knocked softly. No response. She opened it. He was asleep in his chair, his head tilted back at an angle that was going to wreck his neck by morning, his silver watch glinting in the desk lamp's light, papers fanned around him, his suit jacket still on. He looked, for the first time since she had arrived, genuinely young. The sharpness was gone from his face. The guard was completely down. She stood there and looked at him, and something moved through her that she wasn't ready for. Something quiet and aching and inconvenient. She went to the hall closet and retrieved the woven throw blanket, the one Madame Han had placed on the sofa, the only soft thing in the entire house that seemed chosen with warmth in mind. She brought it back and draped it over him with careful hands. She didn't touch him. She just arranged it around his shoulders. Then she reached past him, slowly, trying not to wake him, and turned off the desk lamp. In the dark, she straightened up. And she found him watching her. His eyes were open. He had been awake for how long, she didn't know. He lay completely still under the blanket, looking up at her in the darkness, the only light coming from the winter moonlight through the window. Neither of them said a word. She stepped back, turned, left the room. In the hallway, she pressed herself against the wall for a moment and waited for her heartbeat to remember its normal rhythm. Behind the closed study door, Lee Min-jun sat alone in the dark with a throw blanket around his shoulders and one hand pressed flat against his own chest, as if checking whether something had changed inside it. Something had. He just didn't have a name for it yet. But it was coming. And nothing, not his arrogance, not his boardroom armor, not his father's silver watch, not 3 decades of carefully constructed emotional walls, was going to be able to stop it. February arrived in Seoul like a correction, colder than January, sharper at the edges, the kind of winter that made you feel the city had decided to be honest about itself. Snow came again on the 2nd Friday of the month, and by afternoon the streets outside the Lee estate were buried under 6 inches of silence. Inside, something had shifted. Min-jun noticed it in small, infuriating ways. He noticed the hour he came home. He noticed whether the kitchen light was on. He noticed, though he would have denied this to any living person, whether he could hear her moving through the rooms above him when he worked late. The rhythm of her presence had entered the architecture of his days without his permission, the way a sound you ignore long enough eventually becomes the sound of home. He didn't like it. He didn't do anything about it either. On the Friday the snow came, he had a board meeting that ran until 6, a call with Tokyo that ran until 8, and a confrontation with his executive director that he had been quietly postponing for 2 weeks. He arrived home at 9:15 in a mood that had sharp edges on all 4 sides. The entrance hall was warm. The lights were low. And the smell, something that had been following him through the house for weeks now, the smell of good food, real food, food made with intention, was drifting from the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway again. He seemed to always stop in this doorway now. Precious was at the stove. She had her back to him. She was wearing an oversized cream sweater tucked partially into dark trousers, her braids pulled up loosely, her gold necklace visible at the back of her neck, where the collar had drifted. On the counter beside her was a small portable speaker playing something soft and rhythmic, Nigerian. He had started to recognize the sound of it, its warmth, its particular way of making even silence feel inhabited. She turned, saw him, and reached over to turn the speaker off.
"Leave it," he said.
She looked at him. Slowly, she turned the volume down but left it playing. "You didn't eat," she said. Not an accusation, just an observation, the way she observed most things, simply, without performance. "How do you know that?" "Madame Han said the dinner she left for you wasn't touched. And you look like someone who went through a wall today." He almost smiled. The silver watch slid against his wrist as he loosened his collar. "Almost. I look like someone who runs a $40 billion company." "Those aren't mutually exclusive with going through a wall," she said, and turned back to the stove. He sat down at the kitchen counter. The first time he had ever done that in this house, sat in his own kitchen, and he didn't know exactly when he decided to do it, only that his legs were tired and something about this room, specifically when she was in it, made stopping feel like a possibility. She set a bowl in front of him, without asking. Jollof rice. She had been making it for herself periodically, and Madame Han had apparently tried it once and declared it the closest thing to God's food she had experienced, but she had also, Minjun noticed, added braised short rib to it. Korean short rib. His housekeeper's recipe, which he recognized from childhood dinners he hadn't thought about in years. He looked at the bowl. "You combined them," he said. "They pair well," she said, settling onto the opposite counter with her own bowl. "I had leftovers from both. It seemed wasteful not to." He picked up his chopsticks. He ate. She was right.
It was extraordinary.
For a while neither of them spoke. The speaker played something low. The snow pressed against the kitchen window. The house was quiet in every direction. "How is your mother?" he asked. Precious looked up from her bowl. "She's stable," she said after a moment. "Her last blood work was better than the previous month. My sister says she's complaining about the hospital food, which means she's feeling well enough to have opinions." Something small moved across his face, not quite a smile, but adjacent to it. "That's a good sign." "It is."
She paused.
"My family thinks I'm working at a hotel. I didn't tell them the specifics of this arrangement. They would worry." He looked at her. "Why would they worry?" She met his eyes. "Because they know what it looks like, a young woman going alone to a foreign country to live in a rich man's house. They know what people assume." The weight of that sentence settled in the kitchen like something physical. "I haven't," he started.
"I know," she said. Her voice was steady.
"I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you what the world looks like from where I'm standing." He was quiet for a long moment. The silver watch ticked softly on his wrist. "What do you tell them when they ask how it's going?" "I tell them my employer is exacting," she said. "And that Seoul in winter is the most beautiful place I've ever been cold." He looked at her across the counter. The warm light of the kitchen. Her gold necklace. Her calm, patient eyes. "I'll call the foundation on Monday," he said. "I'll arrange for an additional monthly transfer to go directly to your family for medical expenses. Outside of your salary." She went very still. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. His voice was quiet but firm. "Consider it a correction." She looked at him for a long time. Not with gratitude that humbled her, not with the deferential overwhelm he was used to receiving, but with something clear and direct that felt, to Minjun, more significant than any award he had ever been given.
"Thank you," she said.
"Finish eating," he said, and looked back down at his bowl. The warmth between them grew slowly and privately, the way warmth does in winter, noticed only when you've already been changed by it. She learned that he took his coffee without sugar, but with exactly 1.5 spoons of cream, measured precisely because anything else tasted wrong. She learned that he had a collection of classical music he never admitted to anyone, and that on the nights he worked past midnight, something with piano would occasionally bleed from the closed study door into the hallway. She learned that the silver watch wound manually. She had seen him do it twice, standing at the window, turning the crown with the same quiet attention she gave to her mother's necklace. He learned that she sang under her breath when she cooked, never a full song, just snatches of melody in Igbo that made the kitchen feel like it had a heartbeat. He learned that she read every evening before sleep, actual books, paperbacks she brought in her suitcase and placed in careful piles on her bedside table. He learned that she was not in the least afraid of silence, that she could sit in the same room as another person for an hour and exist in complete peace with a quiet between them. No one had ever done that around him before. Not in his memory. Everyone around Lee Min-jun was always performing something, even in silence. Precious was just present. Entirely herself. Entirely unconcerned with adjusting herself to accommodate what he might want her to be. It was, he found, the most disorienting thing he had ever experienced. The rainy afternoon in early March was the first time he saw her outside without a coat. He had been watching through the study window, not deliberately, just a glance that became longer, and she was in the courtyard, standing in the light rain with her face tilted up like she was accepting something, her braids dark and wet, her cream sweater spotted with rain, the gold necklace bright against her throat. He had no idea what she was doing. She wasn't doing anything. She was simply standing in the rain, and her expression was something between grief and peace, the look of a person who is very far from home and knows it, but has found, in this small stolen moment, a way to feel the sky nonetheless. He was out the door before he registered that he'd moved. She heard the door and turned, already starting to form an explanation. I just needed some air. He held an umbrella over her head. They stood there. 3 inches of distance between them, the rain hitting the umbrella above. Her face turned up to his, water on her eyelashes, her gold necklace catching even the gray light.
You'll get sick, he said.
I'm fine, she said. You'll get sick, he said again. And you're not allowed to get sick. I need you functional. Something in her eyes shifted. She was trying not to smile. He could see it, the effort she was making to maintain composure.
Understood, she said.
I'll get sick at a more convenient time. He looked at her and the almost smile won, just briefly, the corner of her mouth giving way, her eyes brightening, rain still on her face. He did not look away. Come inside, he said quietly. 1 more minute, she said. He stood there and held the umbrella over her for 1 more minute in the rain. Neither of them mentioned it afterward. Both of them thought about it for days. Kang Hyun-soo noticed in the 3rd month. He noticed it at a Tuesday morning briefing when Min-jun, who had not voluntarily referenced anything personal to anyone in the 6 years Hyun-soo had known him, said, with complete casualness, Precious mentioned the Haneda deal might read better if we reframe the labor provisions. She has a point. Hyun-soo looked up from his tablet. Precious, he repeated, the domestic worker. She has a degree in hospitality and business management, Min-jun said, not looking up from his documents. She understands operational optics better than half my junior directors. Hyun-soo said nothing for a moment. Then, you've been discussing the Haneda deal with the domestic worker. I've been discussing it with someone whose opinion surprised me, Min-jun said. Would you like to address the actual agenda items? Hyun-soo said nothing else. But on his way out, he paused at the door and looked at his employer, at the silver watch, the slightly softer set of his jaw, the absence of the particular tension that had lived around his eyes for the last 6 years, and he thought, oh no, this is going to be complicated. Seo Yura came back in April. This time she came with intention, sharp, clear, weaponized intention, in the form of a private family dinner she had orchestrated through the Lee family attorney, framed as a social obligation Min-jun couldn't politely decline. She arrived with her mother, 2 family friends, and a velvet box she did not open during dinner, but left prominently on the side table where Min-jun could see it. Precious served the dinner. That had been Yura's specific request, delivered to Madame Han with a particular sweetness that was really sharpness.
She wanted to see it.
She wanted Min-jun to see it, the display of it, the hierarchy of it. Precious understood exactly what was happening. She served with absolute grace. Every plate placed perfectly. Every response to the table courteous and efficient. She gave Yura no reaction to read, no expression to misuse. She was a professional, and she performed her profession with the quiet dignity that was the one thing she absolutely refused to abandon no matter who was in the room. Yura watched her all evening. And near the end of dinner, Yura said, in Korean, loudly enough to reach the kitchen, "It's remarkable, isn't it? How well-trained some people can be." The table went quiet. Minjun set his chopsticks down. Everyone at the table felt the change in the room. His mother's friend reached for her water glass. Yura's mother looked at a point on the wall.
Yura, he said.
His voice was quiet. That particular quiet. "I'm complimenting the staff," she said, all smooth innocence.
"No," he said.
"You're not." Another silence. Longer. "Precious has a name," he said.
"And a degree."
"And considerably more professional competence than you've demonstrated in this conversation." He picked up his chopsticks. "I'd recommend we move to a different topic." Yura's face went white, then carefully, beautifully blank. In the kitchen, Precious stood still with her hand on the counter. She had heard most of it. She pressed her lips together.
Breathed.
She went back out and cleared the next course with steady hands. Later, after the guests had gone and Madame Han had said goodnight, Precious was finishing the last of the kitchen cleaning when she heard his footsteps. She didn't turn. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "It'll cause you problems. With her family. With the alliance they're building. Let it." She turned then. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, where he always stood, with his jacket off and his silver watch bright on his wrist, and an expression on his face she had never seen before. Something raw and slightly desperate, like a man who has just discovered he is standing much closer to the edge of something than he realized. "Minjun," she said. His given name. The first time she had used it. She hadn't planned to, it just came out that way, with the weight of the moment. He went very still. "Be careful," she said softly.
She didn't specify of what.
She didn't need to. They both understood. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and then he said quietly, "Good night, Precious," and walked away. She stood alone in the kitchen with the warm light and the silence, and her mother's necklace against her collarbone, and she pressed her hands flat on the counter and told herself to be sensible. She told herself that every day for the next 2 weeks. It helped less and less. The photograph appeared in a tabloid on the second Tuesday of May. Someone, a journalist, a driver, a stranger with a camera phone and an interest in Korea's most powerful reclusive billionaire, had captured the moment in March. The umbrella, the courtyard, the rain, the 6 inches of space between them, and the way he was looking down at her. The headline was, as headlines always are, everything true facts can become when arranged for damage. Lee Min-jun and his foreign maid. What is really happening in the Hanam estate? The story was online by 8 a.m. and had 40,000 shares by noon. Hyun-soo arrived at the estate at 8:15 with a tablet and an expression that said he had not slept. Min-jun read the article once, set the tablet on his desk, and was quiet for a long time. His silver watch was very still on his wrist. His jaw was set. "The board is requesting a statement," Hyun-soo said carefully.
"No."
"Sir." "I said no." He looked up. "Prepare a press response that says the Lee family estate staffing arrangements are a private matter and the company is focused on Q2 performance. Nothing else." "That's not going to satisfy." "Nothing else, Hyun-soo." Hyun-soo left. Precious found out at 9 a.m. when Madame Han came to her room with the expression of someone delivering difficult weather news. She read the article on her own phone. She read the comments. She sat with it for a long time. Then she went downstairs, tied on her apron, and began her work for the day. Min-jun found her mid-morning in the library, where she was reorganizing a set of shelves that didn't need reorganizing. She organized things when she was processing. He had learned that, and he stood in the doorway. "Precious." She turned. Her face was composed, but her eyes were doing something he recognized now, holding more than she was releasing. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's not your fault," she said. "People photograph things." "That's not what I'm apologizing for." He stepped into the library. "I'm apologizing because this puts you in a difficult position. Because your reputation matters and you didn't sign up to be headline material." She looked at him steadily. "What are you going to do?" What I told Hyunsu. Nothing. It's not news. It's an interpretation. Minjun. She said it gently. If you give it no response, people will fill the silence with what they want to believe. Let them, he said. You're bored. I don't care about my bored right now, he said. And then stopped, as if surprised by his own sentence. They stood in the library with afternoon light coming through the windows and rows of unread books around them and the specific weight of a moment that was asking to become something neither of them had name for yet. Precious, he said. His voice was different, the sharpness entirely gone. Do you want to leave? She blinked. You can, he said. If this is too much. If this is not what you came here for. The foundation would still honor your contract terms. I'd make sure of it personally. You wouldn't lose anything. She was quiet for a long time. Do you want me to leave? She asked. His jaw moved. No, he said. I don't. She held his gaze. Then I'm not leaving. June arrived, and something between them had quietly, irrevocably stopped pretending it was anything other than what it was. He read with her sometimes in the evenings, separately, in the same room, each with their own book, the comfortable silence they had built between them filling the space with something that felt, to both of them, like the most intimate thing either had experienced in years. He told her about his father one night. He didn't plan to. They were in the garden. She had started tending it in April, planting things because she said a garden was a letter to the future, and he was watching her, and the silver watch was in his hand because he'd taken it off and was holding it, and somehow the story came out. How his father had been distant. How the company had always been the love Lee Seo-jun had been most fluent in. How Minjun had grown up learning to speak that language, business and strategy and ambition, because those were the words his father understood, and Minjun had spent 30 years trying to be understood. The will, he said. The condition. At first I thought it was one last manipulation. One last way for him to control me. Precious set down her trowel and looked at him. And now, she asked. He turned the watch over in his palm. Now I think he knew something was broken in me. And he couldn't fix it himself. He'd spent too long being the thing that broke it. A pause. So he sent someone who could. Precious looked at him for a long, still moment. He sent a woman from Lagos with one suitcase, she said softly. Yes, he said. He did. She reached over and, very gently, took the watch from his hand. She turned it over. Read the inscription on the back. She hadn't seen it before. To Minjun. The best of me. Father. Her throat moved. She handed it back. He put it back on his wrist, and his hand was not entirely steady. He loved you, she said. In the only language he had. I know that, Minjun said. Now. She looked at him with those calm, deep eyes, and he looked back at her, and the garden was warm and green around them, and both of them were, for this one quiet moment, entirely without armor. He reached out and touched her hand. Just her hand. Just the back of it, with 2 fingers, so lightly it could almost have been accidental. She didn't move away. Precious, he said. Don't say something you'll regret in the morning, she said quietly. I won't regret it, he said. Minjun. I know what this is, he said. His voice was low and certain. I know what you are. I know what I feel. And I am telling you I won't regret it. She looked at his hand on hers. Then up at him. The year isn't over, she said. I know. There's still the board. The inheritance. Yura's family. The media. Everything. I know all of that, he said. Then I want you to know, he said quietly, that I have not felt like a human being in a very long time. And you came into this house, and you made me one again. You made this house feel like something. You made me feel like something. He paused. I need you to know that. Whatever else happens. She was quiet for a long, careful moment. I know, she said finally. Softly. I know. Her fingers turned under his hand and held it, briefly, warmly, before she let go and picked up her trowel again. But she was smiling as she turned back to the garden. A real smile, the kind that came from the chest, not the courtesy reflex. And he watched it happen, and something in him settled into place like a key finding its lock after a long, exhausting search. The board meeting happened in July. Minjun sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces of 14 executives, several of whom he had known since childhood, most of whom had spent the last month positioning themselves in response to the tabloid story and the silence that had followed it.
Hyun-soo sat at his right hand.
The silver watch was exactly where it always was. A senior director named Young Tae-hwan cleared his throat. The Foundation monitoring report for month 7 will be submitted next week. The board is satisfied with the compliance of the inheritance condition. A pause, measured and deliberate. However, there is the matter of public perception. Say what you mean, Director Young, Min-jun said. Young adjusted his papers. The company's association with an international domestic worker, a foreign national, living in the CEO's private residence has generated the kind of media attention that concerns several board members. The implication being that your personal life has become human,
Min-jun said.
The word landed in the room and did not leave. Sir, Hyun-soo said carefully. My father built this company, Min-jun said. He did not raise his voice. He never did. And in the last act of his life, he decided that the thing I lacked, the thing that would make me genuinely worthy of leading it, was not better strategy, not more ruthlessness, not more elite connections. He paused. It was humanity. He was right. He looked around the table. Precious Okafor has been in my home for 7 months. She is intelligent, principled, and she has more genuine competence and dignity than most people in this room. If any of you would like to build a case around her nationality or her profession or the fact that I have chosen to treat her as a full human being deserving of respect, I invite you to bring it. And I invite you to remember that I own 54% of this company. The table was very quiet. The inheritance condition will be fulfilled in full, he said. And after that, my personal decisions remain personal. He straightened the documents in front of him. Shall we move to Q3? They moved to Q3. She was in the kitchen when he came home that night, and she knew from the way he walked that something significant had happened. She had learned the language of his walking. The board meeting walk, the late-night investor walk, the exhausted but satisfied walk. This was the last one. How did it go? She asked. He sat down at the counter. I said some things, he said. What kind of things? He looked at her. The warm kitchen light. The gold necklace.
The braids.
The person who had, over 7 months, become the most real thing in his life. I defended you, he said, in front of 14 executives and a board of directors. She was very still. You didn't have to.
I told you, he said.
I don't say things I'll regret. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and put the kettle on. Citrus and ginger? She said. Please, he said. And they stayed in the kitchen together, warm and quiet, while the city moved and the night came down. The year ended on a December evening. Snow again. Seoul in winter, as she had found it, as she had learned to love it despite herself. The pale sky, the soft erasure of everything harsh, the city held briefly in something that looked like peace. The Foundation submitted its final monitoring report. The inheritance transfer was confirmed. Lee Min-jun was, officially and completely, the head of Lee Seo-jun Holdings. The year was fulfilled. The condition met. She was free to go. He found her in the garden, winter bare now, the things she'd planted in spring dormant under the cold, standing with her coat on and her suitcase beside her feet, looking up at the gray sky the same way she had once stood in the rain. He walked toward her. She heard him and turned. Her eyes were bright, not from crying, not yet. From the weight of something that didn't have a clean name. The car to the airport, she started. I canceled it, he said. She looked at him. He stood in front of her, silver watch on his wrist, his hands at his sides, his face completely open in a way it had never been in 34 years of a closed, defended life. I've been trying to find the right words for this for 3 months, he said. I've been writing it in my head, the way you write letters to your mother. Looking for the sentence that says exactly the right thing. Min-jun. I love you, he said. I love you in the way that doesn't leave room for anything careful. I love you the way my father never taught me to love anything, without condition, without strategy, without a plan for what happens if it goes wrong.
He paused.
The silver watch caught the winter light. I don't want a year. I want every year. I want you in this house not because a will says so, but because, when you're not in it, it goes back to being empty. And I've lived in empty long enough to know the difference. She looked at him in the winter garden, in the city that had started as a foreign place and become, quietly and irreversibly, something close to home. My family is in Lagos, she said. I know. My life is complicated in ways that don't fit cleanly into yours. I know that too. And you are still, sometimes, profoundly arrogant, she said. Something moved across his face, and it was a smile. A full one. The first full smile she had ever seen from him, and it rearranged his face entirely, made him look younger and warmer and more like the man she had suspected was under all the cold armor from the very first night. I'm working on it, he said. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The garden around them, the snow beginning to fall again, soft, gentle, indifferent, and beautiful. She reached up and touched the silver watch on his wrist. Just briefly, just the way she had touched it once before, in the library. Your father, she said quietly, was a very clever man. He was, Minjun said. He knew you needed someone who wouldn't be afraid of you, she said. Someone who would stay in the rain when you told them to come inside. Someone who would put a blanket over you when you fell asleep and not wake you up. Someone from Lagos with one suitcase, he said softly. She laughed then, a real laugh, warm and full, the one she usually kept for phone calls home and private moments in her room. And hearing it, he felt something shift in his chest like a door opening into light. I called my mother this morning, she said, before the car was supposed to come. What did she say? Precious smiled, slow, certain, her gold necklace bright against her collarbone, her eyes holding everything she was. She said, the heart doesn't always go where we plan it, but when it goes somewhere true, you stay. He reached out. This time not 2 fingers, his whole hand, his warm palm against the side of her face, gentle and steady, the silver watch cold against her cheek for just a moment before the warmth of his hand took over. She put her hand over his. I'm staying, she said. He exhaled, the kind of exhale that takes something held for years with it when it goes. The snow fell around them, quiet and generous. Seoul spread out beyond the garden walls in its winter magnificence. And Lee Min-jun, who had been famous for being cold, who had been famous for his arrogance and his isolation and his iron refusal to let anything or anyone pass the walls he'd built, stood in his garden with his hand against the face of the woman who had dismantled him, gently, room by room, cup of tea by cup of tea, letter by letter, and he stayed exactly where he was. Completely, without armor. Completely, for the first time in his life, home. Madame Han watched from the kitchen window. She pressed her hand to her heart. Finally, she whispered. Finally, this house is alive. And somewhere, in the private way of things that cannot be proven but are nonetheless felt, in the weight of a silver watch on a living wrist, in the warmth that had replaced the cold of a December estate, in the particular mercy of a father's last, wise gift, Lee Seo-jun smiled.
The end.
Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the coldest hearts are just hearts that haven't found the right warmth yet, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you. See you in the next one.